What's cracking, people? I'm Theo Kane. Hold tight, everybody that's locked in, and welcome back to Slimehouse TV. So I'm going to be doing something a little bit different in today's episode. Toy making, but with a twist. A little bit different to what you're normally used to seeing on the channel. So I got hit up by my friend Bill Making Stuff, and he asked me if I wanted to be part of this big collaboration that he's doing. And who am I to turn down Bill Making Stuff? So what I'm going to be doing in this video is taking some of the toys from my collection, as well as a bunch of stuff that I've got in boxes that's not doing anything, and Frankensteining them together into a brand new toy for my collection. Now this episode is going to be a bit of a movie. I went on quite the journey to get to the end result that I ended up with, but I really hope that you like it and I can't wait to show it you. I've also got a cool little announcement to make at the end of this video as well, so make sure you stick around right to the end of it so you can find out what that is. But I'm buzzing for you to get into this one today. Did I create something awesome, or did I ruin a bunch of valuable toy accessories? I'll let you be the judge of that. But if that sounds like a bit of you, sit back, make sure you're comfy, and get strapped in for what is probably the biggest collaboration that I've ever been a part of on YouTube, right here on Slimehouse TV. Let's do this. So if you've been keeping up to date with the studio build episodes that I've been dropping over the past few months, you might remember in the latest one I mentioned something called the Big Bot Bash. So this is a collaboration project that's been put together by Bill Making Stuff, where him, myself and a ton of other YouTubers, mainly in the crafting and wargaming space, are all coming together to create a scratch-built robot in our own individual styles, and in that last episode that I dropped, I talked about how I was getting myself all geared up for it. Now, I've been in the action figure collecting world for most of my life. I'm forever at toy shows, I go and view and film big private collections, people bring me stuff, I get a lot sent to me, and when you've been collecting toys as long as I have and you've been in that world for a long time, you get a lot of gold, but you also acquire a lot of random parts and broken bits as well. I've also got boxes full of weapons and spare parts. A lot of good stuff that's ready for when I get the loose figure to put with it or to use in future trades and that kind of thing, but then I have also got a lot of trash as well. Stuff that'll probably never get used for anything. So when Bill hit me up about doing this project, I instantly started thinking about how I could incorporate some of that stuff that I've been hoarding for all these years. So if you've been watching my channel for any amount of time, even for the past few months, you'll have probably seen me create my own action figure. Some of my own design and characters that I've created, or stuff that's more of a homage to a movie or a game that I like. Sometimes they've been bigger articulated figures, sometimes they've been minifigures or a single sculpt, but no matter what they were, they've always been made in pretty much the same way. 3D sculpting in Nomad on my iPad, then printing and painting, and creating something that looks like it came off a Toy Factory production line, or at least as close as I could get it to look like that. But this Big Bot Bash that Bill had put together had two very clear rules. Firstly, the robot that you made had to be created with a very specific list of traits, which I'll talk about in a minute, and also there could be no 3D printing, which basically threw everything out the window that I know about toy making, which is fine because it meant that I got to do something a little bit different, and it also gave me a good excuse to use up some of the trash that I'd been hoarding. And although I don't scratch build that often, it's not something that I never do. Last year I did the custom amp suit challenge with my Slimehouse subscribers. I also built the big Ghetto City set for the Resident Evil video, so I felt like I would kinda overdue a bit of scratch building, and I was looking forward to getting back into it. So in terms of the prompts that I just spoke about, Bill had basically put together this cool little system called the Junkbot Generator, where you roll a d6 dice, and then depending on what number you get, that determines what each individual part of your robot should look like, or at least what vibe it should be. So myself and a bunch of the other people that are involved all got together on a video call, and together we all let the roll of the dice decide what kind of robot we were going to be building. Now, I was born in the 80s, I grew up in the 90s. This was a real good time for robots and mech suits in games and films and animation. We were spoilt for choice, and as a kid that loved this kind of thing, I couldn't get enough of it. And as soon as I got talking about making my own robot, I knew that I wanted to try and incorporate some of that style into my one.
Fighting Seabots figure packs, each sold separately from Micro Machines.
I also knew that I was probably one of the few people involved in this that didn't come from a wargaming and hobby background on YouTube, me existing more in the world of toy design and vintage toy collecting, and I wanted to represent that in my build. So before I started trying to make anything or stick anything together, as always, I pulled out a bunch of relevant toys from my collection so I could have a real good look at them, really analyse what it is that I like about them, and see if there's any traits or colour schemes that I could take inspiration from when I'm building my robot. you see what I'm talking about? You see how much character there is just in this selection here? The unique shapes of them all, the funky colour palettes that they've used, the way that you can look at them and imagine how they might sound and move. And I know that what I've got here is a real mix of different eras, but to me, in a way, they still all have a very familiar and fun vibe to them, and that's definitely something that I wanted to try and capture in my build. So it was finally time for me to start building my robot, and as I previously mentioned, I have got boxes of random stuff that could all potentially be used to create this thing. Also though, I'm not stupid, I wasn't about to start ruining perfectly good vintage toys and accessories and glue together bits that I know are valuable, so although I have got a lot of stuff, I was still limited to which pieces I could use. There was one thing though, that as whack as it sounds, because it means we're all rapidly getting very old, is now classed as a vintage toy. It is one that I were more than happy to start chopping up. One that I have saved for this very occasion actually, and also one that I kinda saw as my secret weapon in this challenge, an old box of K'NEX. The awesome So K'NEX is something that was very much a staple of my youth. I spent hours messing about with this stuff as a kid. It clicks together real easy, it's pretty sturdy and stays in place if you strengthen it right. It's also plastic so you can cut it and glue it and stick stuff to it, and I figured it'd be an awesome way to build the actual skeletal frame of my robot, like the base of it, and also be very on brand for me and what we do here at Slimehouse. So as the name of this challenge would suggest, I just started bashing away at my bot, building some sort of shape based on the roles that I'd got, which I haven't even spoken about properly yet. So the roles that I got from the Junkbot generator were as follows. For head, I got alien, body, scary, arms, mismatch, hands, kaboom, legs, long, and flavour, savage. So they were all the key points that I would have to adhere to and the things that I would have to bear in mind while I was planning this thing out. So you've kind of got to use your imagination with it. Imagine him holding a rifle like that, some kind of big shooter, so big blaster. And he's also a big guy, check this. He's clocking in at around 15 inches, just a bit taller, 15.5. He's gonna be a big dude. As somebody who's like a big vintage toy collector and a toy historian and a toy protector, it always feels weird when I'm cutting things up to do kit bashing, even if it's something cheap like K'NEX that nobody collects and it's not really worth anything. Cutting things up or gluing stuff together and just doing things that's like irreversible to vintage toys, it still always feels weird to me. I can never quite get used to it. So once I was happy with the shape that I'd built up, I used super glue to lock the joints in place a bit better. I know K'NEX is quite strong and it's good at holding itself together once it's clicked into place, but I also knew that there were probably going to be a lot of weight to contend with once I started sticking stuff on this thing, because although I had built the framework out of K'NEX, most of that was all going to be getting heavily covered over, and to do that I would need a lot of stuff. Now, as I previously mentioned, I wasn't just going to use anything for this guy, so I had a good sort through all of my Toy Bits boxes, finding a bunch of things that I was happy to part with and take to pieces, bits that I knew would work, bits that I knew probably wouldn't work, but I'd keep them to one side anyway just in case. One thing that was for certain though is that I was going to need a lot of this stuff, which meant either way I was definitely going to have to destroy a lot of toys to make this thing. I'd also gathered a bunch of other random bits as well, lots of household life junk and that kind of thing that I thought might come in handy. Again, at this point, not really too sure about what I were going to do with it, but I wanted to keep it to hand, just so I had it if I needed it. So the first thing that I know I had to do was start with his legs and get them as weighted down as possible. I knew that in order to have this thing standing up in this best foot forward position that I'd put him in, he was going to need his bottom half as heavy as I could get it without losing any of his shape. To do this, I just added a bunch of nuts and bolts and rivets to his feet and his legs, wherever they would fit and anywhere that I felt would add to his heaviness. Perfection. The reason I chose to have him stepping forward like this as well is because I wanted to make it feel a bit dynamic. I figured it'd be pretty easy to have him stood looking straight forward, but if I had him leaning like this with his rifle pointed down, I just felt like it added a bit more storytelling. Made him feel like he was mid-movement, and obviously I just like to make my life harder whenever I make anything and constantly challenge myself. Like this build wasn't already challenging enough. Oh yeah, the bot bash generator also demanded that my robot had long legs, which again just made everything about this stance that little bit more difficult. Now, I know some crafters on YouTube like to tell you every single bit that they're using, but if I did that, I feel like this video would be about 5 hours long and nobody wants to see that. I'm basically just using junk. A bit off an old Stanley knife, some parts that came with the IKEA cupboards that we didn't end up using, some spray bottle lids, just stuff that would normally end up in the bin basically. This here that I'm taking apart is the front of a broken Power Rangers Wild Force bike. I also had a bit of a rule when I was sorting through the boxes of toys that if it was something that came off a toy that were like the early 2000s onwards, or Star Wars Power of the Force, or Chat May, then it were fair game, and if it fit, it were getting used. This what I'm destroying here is part of an old Beetleborgs Metallics car. Again, fair game, nobody cares about this thing, it would have sat in my toy box forever. This was awesome as well, because I used it for the robot's ankles, and I tried it a couple of different ways, and everywhere that I put it, it just seemed to fit perfect. Now this is an interesting one, because normally, under normal circumstances, I would never use something like this for a kit bash, like ever. This is a vintage Japanese Magaro Zamac mech model kit. You might remember I picked 2 of these up when we were last at one of the Ancient Mariners' secret stash locations, and although one of them was complete and unopened, this one unfortunately had already been started, and due to some weird reaction with the glue that they'd used all them years ago, part of it had melted and broken, so if I was ever going to put this thing together properly, I would have to make it a whole new head. And I figured because of that, I would sacrifice the parts that were left in this box for the big bot bash, without a second thought either, because this box had some really cool pieces in it, lots of little panels and that kind of thing, and I knew that they were all going to come in very handy later on down the line. So I'd been working on this for a few days at this point. Now I'd made a bit of progress, but nowhere near as much as I knew that I needed to make if I were ever going to meet the deadline to get this thing all finished. So the mission of the day was to get some mass added to the legs so that they didn't just look like K'NEX anymore. To do this, I started off by cutting some plastic square pipe down and gluing them to the K'NEX directly. You might actually remember me picking these up at a recent Doncaster Toy Fair trip. Remember, we didn't buy any toys, but we met Shane Ritchie and bought some bits from the railway stalls. Well, I'm so glad that I did, because at the time I bought these not even knowing what I were going to do with them. But this is definitely one of them situations where you thank your previous self because they were perfect for what I needed here. Now, so much of this project, most of the time spent on it to be honest, was searching for the right shapes, holding them up against each other, trying to stick them where I thought that they should go, and then prizing them off quick before the glue dried because I decided I didn't like it. Lots of patience, lots of thinking, and lots of trial and error. Okay, so I'm currently like 4 days into this build so far. I've done nowhere near as much as I wanted to do. So far, I've just got his legs done, but his legs are now pretty much all finished. I spent a lot of time just adding mass to them. As you know, I built the skeletal frame of these things out of K'NEX, but then I had to like add stuff on top so that it didn't look like K'NEX anymore. And it just takes a long time just adding lots of little bits and dry fitting them and doing a lot of test fitting and that kind of thing, and then putting stuff together that looks like it could have kind of been built that way. I don't want this thing to look like it was made in a junkyard. I want it to at least look kind of machine engineered, like it was constructed in a factory or something like that, and not by like a bunch of like post-apocalyptic Mad Max dudes in a junk field. That's not what I wanted for this particular build today. But I'm really happy with how it's looking so far. I've built lots of little pistons and things. I've left some space where wires and cables and tubes are going to go at the end after I've painted it. But really happy with it so far. One of the things that's made this build really easy as well is the fact that I'm now working in this new space. If you've been following my channel for like the last 6 months or something, you'll know that I've been building my own studio. This is the first thing that I'm actually building in here, and it's just so nice to have such a large space to do it in. So what I'm going to do for the rest of the day is I'm looking to get like his stomach and his torso area all built and his shoulders and stuff. I need to get cracking with this thing. I didn't drop a video this week on the channel because this thing consumed all my time, and I don't want that to happen next week. So going to try and get his stomach and his chest and everything done today, and yeah, then we can move on to his arms and his head and just get him all finished, because like I said, I've already spent way longer on this thing than I wanted to, but I'm having a lot of fun doing it. Really cool to do something different. So yeah man, I'll catch up with you later. So as I just mentioned, something that I had on my mind while I was building this guy is that I wanted him to look and feel authentic. In a sense that I didn't want it to look like just a bunch of stuff that had been glued together, even though that's obviously what it is. I wanted it to look like the parts that I'd used all fit together with some kind of order, like it was built in some sort of factory or workshop with parts and panels that were specifically made for this robot. not just a bunch of scavenged and repurposed pieces in some post-apocalyptic wasteland. That's not the vibe that I was going for. I didn't want it to seem messy or jumbled up. Again, I felt like it'd probably be easier to do it that way, but that's just not how I wanted to do things. Beautiful. In my head as well, I also had a storyline for this robot, which I'll talk about later, but having this in mind definitely helped a lot. So like, although he was going to have a big cannon, he wasn't going to be from any kind of military background, which meant that I didn't have to worry about covering up every exposed area with armor plating, and I could afford to leave some areas exposed, which is what I needed to do really, as everything that I'm using here is stuff that isn't supposed to fit together, but I've got to make it look like it does. So having in mind that it didn't have to be completely armored up everywhere definitely helped a lot. And to be honest, lots of times I looked at what I was doing here and I really didn't like it because it wasn't how I pictured it in my head or how I envisioned it. The pressure was also kind of on because don't forget, this is a big collaboration project. There's going to be a lot of new eyes on this video and there's some real legends involved in this project. So I didn't want mine to look whack alongside them, but at the same time, I also had to remind myself that I'm not building a Gunpla kit here. I'm not working with a bunch of pieces that fit together perfectly, and I'm also not putting together something that I've even sculpted myself. I'm working with what I've got and trying to make the best robot that I can from it. So of course it's not going to look like the thing that I've pictured in my head because I'm trying to basically create something from a bunch of junk that's never been put together before. So we're about 10 days before the deadline, and for me it's even less time because I'm going to be leaving the country before that, which I'll talk about at the end of the video or in a different video or something like that. But I've been looking on the Discord at what everyone else has been creating and there's some really awesome stuff on there. But one thing I am noticing is that everyone's built theirs a lot smaller than mine. I don't know why I decided to do mine so big. Mine's crazy. It's like 4 times, 5 times the size of most people's. So I've not done myself any favors by doing that, but I've done it now. I've made my bed. I've got to lay in it. So yeah. Need to get this thing finished now because I'm seeing everyone else's is nearly finished or they're getting them primed and things and I've got so much to do yet. So building the arms was very similar to building the legs. Every part that I used had to be an identical pair or something. If I used a piece of pipe on the left side, I had to use the exact same piece of pipe on the right side. And it was getting to a point now where I felt like I was running out of matching pieces and I'd been looking over the same boxes of junk for days and trying to picture how I could use them. I went to my local charity shop and found a Meccano style robot kit which helped because it gave me a whole new bunch of pieces to use and they were really helpful. But at this point I was also still a bit stumped how I was even going to get this guy to hold together because he was starting to become very rickety and unbalanced with the amount of stuff that had been piling on top of him, and like I said, this guy was only held together by K'NEX after all. So what I used for the joints was the articulation pieces from a couple of K'NEX robot people. Now you might remember these, they were like 5-inch action figure style characters that you could get with K'NEX kits. They're actually pretty awesome and useful little figures. I've heard about people using them for stop motion before because they're very poseable and they hold their positions really well. But when you're dealing with the amount of weight that I was with this guy at this point in the build, then they really don't want to hold in place at all. So I figured that what I would do is get him in the position where I wanted him and then try and fix him in place with resin, because otherwise there were no way that they were going to hold the weight of this big gun that I was going to be building him after this. Before that though, I had to build the arms, and I had to build them with the joints free so that none of the pieces that are stuck down interfered with each other when I bent them into position later. I also had to kind of work in reverse because I would have to build the cannon and then build the hands to fit around the cannon and then fit the wrists of the hands to the arms, then hold everything in place while I sealed the joints with resin. And I'll be honest, at this point I just wanted to get the thing made. I'd been seeing greeblies and little coloured pieces of plastic in my sleep. I couldn't walk around my house or a shop without scanning every single piece of anything that I saw to see if it could be used for potential robot parts. I'd spent way longer on this thing already than I'd planned to. Like I said, I had the fact that I'm leaving the country in a few days on my mind to start working on a big job, and it were all just getting to a point where I was really ready to just be done with this whole project. So making the gun was actually my favourite part of this entire build. It came out way better than I expected it to. You know when you're a kid and you just start putting bits of pens together and stuff in school when you're daydreaming and making a little rifle? Well, it were exactly like that, but it just all came together perfectly. I didn't film too much of making the hands, but I basically just did them build making stuff beadbot style, threading beads on wire and bending them into the right position. I then stuck some pieces of Lego on them just to make them look a bit more armour plated. And as for the head, I used a piece of old Multimax Sky Patroller vehicle that were broken, if you remember that toy line, stuck a bunch of other pieces on it to create a kind of crab alien looking head, and once everything was stuck into place and everything was where it should be, I took a step back and I had to admit I was kind of impressed with myself. So as you can see, he's all primed. This is the stage now where I can see all the little imperfections, all the little bits that I'm not happy with, all the little bits where two pieces of plastic didn't quite sit together perfectly. So what I'm going to do is fill all those little cracks with a bit of technical sterling mud, a bit of technical paint, just give it a little bit of crust and rust and wear. So in all these little areas that I'm not happy with, I'm going to add a little bit of technical paint and then give it another dust of white, and then I can start adding the actual colour to it, which I'm really looking forward to because that's going to bring the whole thing to life. Also, if I sound a little bit nasally, I've been so ill for the past few days. The fact that I've been able to get this much done is a miracle. I've been so ill, I've had such bad cold. Then I trapped a nerve in my neck, so I've got like ibuprofen cream all over my shoulder trying to make my neck not be in too much agony. It's horrible. But anyway, let's get back to the painting because, yeah, the time is really ticking now and I really need to get this thing finished. So my idea here was to dab the crusty texture paint all over any little areas that didn't quite match up, anything that didn't sit right with me, or where the glue had melted the plastic or stuff that just looked a bit rough. What I would then do is spray the white primer over this again, so that when I sprayed the next colour over it, the texture would be underneath the paint and kind of look like the rust had been corroding from the inside out. Finally, once all that had dried, I went over the top of that with an Army Painter purple, as that's the colour that I decided to go with as a little nod to Ava 1 from Evangelion, which I've just recently watched back all the way through. And from there, it was onto the painting. And in classic Bill Making Stuff style, rather than talk about all the paint that I'm using and stuff, I figured that I'd tell you this guy's story, his origin, a little bit of lore about him and the world that he comes from. Why he's got this big cannon, why he looks the way that he does, and why he was made in the first place. So back in the late 80s and early 90s, there was this whole monster truck trend. There would be events where you could go to and watch these vehicles on giant wheels perform at like stunt shows. The trucks would drive around big dirt tracks doing jumps and driving over cars. Sometimes they'd also turn up at local shopping malls and stuff, and they would have cool names like Bigfoot and Gravedigger, and were almost like semi-famous characters. Kids and parents would take pictures together next to them. I went to see one myself when I was a kid called Sky High and got a free poster of the truck for my bedroom wall. And these types of shows do still happen, a lot of these trucks are still going now, but it was the early 90s where I remember them being really popular. So in this alternative version of our world where this story takes place, and where their technology is obviously a little bit more advanced than ours is, instead of monster trucks that were popular, they had these big robots. And it were very similar to what we had. These shows would take place in big arenas where people would go and watch these giant robots perform stunts, throw cars around and shoot targets with big cannons. It was a pretty extreme show, but very family friendly. People would eat popcorn and corn dogs and cheer the robots on as they did their thing. Also, like the monster trucks of our world, the robots would do public appearances at malls and parades. Some of them even got quite famous. And because they were big and attracted a lot of attention, companies then started sponsoring these robots, and it kind of became like a cool thing for a business to do. Have a robot that they were associated with, a mix between a status symbol because it was a cool thing to have and it showed that you had money, but it also kind of showed that you was a good person because you was willing to sponsor something that people got enjoyment from. And this particular robot ended up being sponsored by an energy drink company, promoting a brand new flavour that they just released. They painted the robot purple and orange to represent the black grape and orange that the drink was flavoured with, and because their primary target audience was motocross riders and extreme sports people and that kind of thing, they called the flavour Savage, which is what they also decided to call him, the robot. And along with his big target shooting cannon, which is the event that he specialised in, he went on to perform at many different stunt shows. So Savage was performing at one of these events one evening. It was a full house like it usually was. People were cheering, the show was running really smoothly, everything was great, everything except the weather, which started off as a bit of light drizzle, but soon turned into a heavy rainstorm. And although for the most part, these shows and what went on inside them was all pretty safe, the same can't be said about this night. And as the rain got worse and the water started to drip through the roof of the arena, a loose wire ended up getting wet, which resulted in a big electrical explosion. Now luckily this did all happen backstage, and by some miracle, nobody was close enough to it to get seriously injured. No person anyway. Savage the robot, however, was standing just a few feet away from it, and he pretty much got hit with the full force of the blast. Now Savage is a robot that's used to performing stunts, so he's used to taking bumps, but nothing like this, and although he didn't get damage beyond repair or anything like that, something did happen to Savage in that explosion that would not only forever change the way that people saw these robots, but would result in this event being the last robot show ever. Now although these robots could perform stunts on cue and do all this stuff, they could only do what they were programmed to. They weren't remote control or anything like that, they did kinda operate on their own, they had artificial intelligence but it was a very simple form of it. They couldn't think or feel or act on their own accord, they would have a set program of moves and sequences that they could do but they could never divert from it, up until this point at least anyway. So back in the arena, the fire from the explosion had now started to spread, and although their stewards and the staff were all working very efficiently in evacuating everyone out of the building, one little girl had somehow got left behind and trapped behind a barrier. She was surrounded by fire and nobody could get to her. Her family were distraught, they had no idea how she got there and they couldn't see any way of getting her out. People were panicking, all seemed lost, when all of a sudden, out of the flames stepped Savage, his long legs walking over the fire as he made his way towards the girl. Everybody was apprehensive, not knowing what was going to happen. The girl was crying and scared, and just before the whole mezzanine that she was standing on collapsed underneath her, Savage leaned in, gently scooped her up, and carried her back to the safety of her family. The fire brigade then turned up and put out all the fires. Luckily nobody was seriously injured, and outside everybody was cheering and celebrating the heroic act of this giant robot, who was standing round looking pretty confused. You see, these robots can't speak or anything like that, so he had no way of communicating what was going on inside his robot brain, but somehow when he got hit with that explosion, the limitation chip that normally controls his actions had got fried and had somehow made his programming like semi-sentient. Now this was all over the news, it became a very big worldwide story. This was not only the first time that anything like this had happened, but it was the first time that a robot in any field other than the military had showed any kind of autonomy. And although most people were praising the fact that this robot had saved this little girl, there were also a lot of people on the other hand that were scared, and they said that if this is something that can happen that easy, then who knows, next time it could be a different story, and a robot could do something unpredictable or even dangerous. These are like 18-foot robots that can rip a car in half, so imagine what they could do to a person. And as what usually happens in any situation, the people with the negative outlook got their way, and before long, a worldwide ban on stunt robots and robot shows got put into place. And every performing robot in the world was either crushed, recycled, or put in storage, including Savage, who luckily didn't get destroyed, but did get locked up in a warehouse where he would remain chained up and powered down for 2 whole decades. So by this time, the little girl that he'd rescued was no longer a little girl anymore. She was like 27, and the older she got, the more she wondered about what happened to the robot that saved her. Because to her it wasn't just some mindless machine, this thing saved her life. She wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. And because it became a really big focus for her, she spent a lot of time researching where he might have been locked up, how secure the building was, what kind of security it had, and also if it came to it, how she would rescue him. And eventually, that's exactly what she did. Which wasn't easy, because like I said, these robots are like 18 foot tall, but the part of the US where he was being stored is pretty shady, so she was able to bribe the security guard to help her get him out, along with his signature cannon and his battery reserves. Luckily the warehouse is right next to a shipping dock as well, so she managed to get him loaded onto a cargo boat and sailed him away from the majority of civilization to the outskirts of the city. Now to be honest, this sounds like a much bigger and more risky operation than it was. Because it's been like 20 years since that all happened, the majority of people have now completely forgotten about it. Humans have got much bigger problems to deal with now, the world has changed a lot, and this robot rescuing a girl 20 years ago is the least of anybody's worries. So long story short, Savage is now back up and running. He lives with the girl and her dog and a bunch of other travelling nomad types out in the desert. They keep him maintained and his battery's charged up, and he protects them from anyone that might want to give him any bother. And yeah, he has a pretty chilled and peaceful life. And that is the story of Savage, aka Salvaje, or Sal as they now call him because most of them are Spanish. And I'm sure over the years he'll have lots of adventures with them, and there's many other stories that we could tell about him and his cool little desert family, but I need to get this video wrapped up, so we will have to save them for another time. I just looked at myself on camera, And I've no idea why I've got this all over my face. I've been using pigment powders and I must have just been touching myself. That sounded way weirder than I meant it to. But he's finished. He's all painted. It's like 2 a.m. in the morning. It's 3 days until the deadline. But he's finally done. And yeah, he actually looks pretty awesome. I'm going to get a bath. Roll the glamour shots. So there you have it, my finished contribution to the 2024 Bill Making Stuff Big Bot Bash. The biggest thing that I've ever kit bashed and the first piece created in the brand new Slimehouse studio. When I first started putting this thing together, I really didn't have any idea what I was creating. I was just honestly throwing stuff together and seeing what worked, just going with the flow with what felt right, but I think it's safe to say that in its own way, it definitely paid off. What do you think? For me, there's definitely a few things that I'd like to improve on. The orange cables that are fed through a lot of the pipes need gluing in because they keep falling out. I also didn't plan on putting him on any kind of base, but he kept falling over when I was trying to film him, so I just had to make one quickly out of a piece of scrap plywood, threw some sand on it and some diorama pieces, so when I get back from my trip, I'm going to definitely spend some more time getting him a bit more solid and less rickety. But to say he's just held together with K'NEX, I think that he's doing alright. And it also makes me think about what potential K'NEX has for customs in the future. I'd love to know if this has inspired anyone else to maybe have a go at making something out of it, because you see it all the time, it's always cheap, and I'll be honest, I'm never going to look at it the same again, so who knows, maybe I'm onto something with this new way of using it, you'll have to let me know. So overall, very pleased with how this came out, and just the fact that I got it finished on such a tight deadline. It was also really cool to not only get asked to be part of this project, but getting to work alongside so many other awesome and talented people constantly made me feel super driven and inspired. I'm really looking forward to seeing the outcome of everybody else's in the project, and I hope you are too. So in terms of everyone else's bot that's involved in this video, I'm not even going to front, there's some absolutely fantastic end results. They're all going to be in this playlist, the Big Bot Bash playlist, so make sure you check them out. I've seen some previews here and there, some finished pieces, and it's been an absolute honour to see how everybody's handled the assignment. So make sure you go ahead and binge that playlist, because chances are you're going to discover a bunch of new YouTube channels that you never knew existed like I did, and yeah, it's been really, really cool to discover them all. Now, like I said at the start of this video, I've got a little bit of an announcement to make, and if you watch this video all the way through, you'll know that I told you I was going to be leaving the country. So, as of the point that this video drops, I should be in Italy. So I'm going to be over in Rome, working on a brand new Slimehouse project. It's not a toy hunting project, but I am going to be doing some toy hunting while I'm out there, so make sure you stay tuned for them videos, because they're going to be awesome. So the next time that we catch up, I will be in Italy, I will be in Rome, all going well, and I can't wait to tell you why I'm going out there. Can't tell you yet, but it's going to be absolutely awesome. I'm going to be putting updates of what I'm doing and what I'm up to out there over on the Patreon and also on the Slime Alliance only Discord as well. So if you want to sign up to that, that's patreon.com/SlimeHouseTV. And all that money goes directly back into the channel, helping me make this brand and this project and these videos bigger and better than ever. If this is your first time checking out the channel, then you're very welcome. I'm Theo Kane, this is Slimehouse TV. I do videos every single week, so if you enjoyed this one today, chances are you're going to enjoy the other stuff that I drop as well. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button if it's the first time you're checking out the channel. I want to say a massive thank you to everybody that's been involved in this collaboration for making me feel so welcome in it. I want to say a big thank you to Bill from Bill Making Stuff for bringing me in, and also a big thank you to you lot for sitting and watching this video. Like I said, it was quite a long one, little bit of a journey, little bit of a movie, but really happy with the end result, and I can't wait to see what you think. So until the next video, which as I said is going to be in Italy, so really looking forward to showing you what I get up to there. I'm Theo Kane, this is Slimehouse TV, and I will catch you in the next episode, but until then, I'm gone. Pow!